studied in Holland. I had a work placement in Bergen in Norway. I did my master's degree in Toronto. A good friend of mine said, why don't you come out to Mauritius? It's much more difficult to read the room, build trust, all of that stuff in a virtual scenario. In the real world, you can build a relationship, you can build trust, you can do a lot of the things that are important, but nothing beats in person.
Welcome to the ISP Podcast, where we speak to salespeople about their journeys to help you demystify the profession. Today, we are joined by Ryan O'Sullivan, author of Building B2B Relationships and fellow of the ISP. Ryan, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. You've moved from finance into sales leadership and also completed a PhD in the process. So really keen to find out more about that.
I'm not sure how many school children are around today wanting a career in sales. I don't remember that being very popular back when I was at school. But if I'm summarizing my journey into sales, I go back to when I was a student. I actually studied in Holland for my bachelor degree. And as part of that course, I had a work placement in Bergen in Norway, funnily enough. So it was an international course where I worked for the Bergen city government, working on a European Union procurement process. I can still remember the term. It was EN 45503. So very sort of dry procurement policy related work. And then I did my master's degree in Toronto, and I did my thesis there on it was called a framework for shrewd investment, which was using Warren Buffett's investment philosophy and trying to identify stocks in that current environment. And that led me, as you mentioned, in finance. That was my first foray into education, from education into employment. I worked for a Canadian mutual fund company called AGF, later bought out by Citigroup. So that was my career work there for a few years. And I'll save you the personal heartbreak story there, but something on a personal level broke down with my relationship at the time. And I had a really good friend of mine, actually the best man at his wedding. He lived in Mauritius. So he was living over there, and we got chatting. He said, why don't you come out to Mauritius? So I was thinking, what could I do out there? He put me in touch with a few people, and I worked, actually, this is after September 11th, and there was a focus on these offshore territories around compliance and money laundering. So I got talking to the regulator out in Mauritius, and they needed someone to build a policy document again. So it was back to my bachelor times around how to onboard and non-compliance and money laundering and all of this type of stuff. So there was a list called the non-cooperating countries and territories list that the US invoked on a lot of these international offshore territories. And I had to go and build this framework for people to abide by the regulations that the US had set out. And again, that was not sales related, but then that led to a sales role, because I had to go and basically promote this new regulation, or at least the compliance manual, to all of the offshore companies that were located there. So I was going out, basically explaining the new law and trying to sell this process, implement this process. So that was my foray into sales, and I've got a bit of a longer version of what happened after that. That's going back good 20 odd years now, and then since then various different roles to where I am today. I work at IntraHive. We have a software that helps to measure the quality of client relationships, and prior to that, I worked at Infosys, which is a global IT services company. I was there for 8.5 years.
Brilliant. The one thing that jumped into my mind was, I think it's in To Sell Is Human. We are all in sales. to some extent, whether it is, actively selling a solution to someone, or whether it is influencing people to come on board with something new, an idea, a new policy, new regulations, as was in your case. Now, really keen to go into a bit more detail surrounding your research into B2B relationships. What was it that sort of drew you to focus on that, and more specifically on how important trust is within that process?
Yeah, so when I mentioned Infosys before, so they're a big global organization. I mean, back then there were nearly 300,000 employees. I don't know how many they are today, but 15 billion in revenue. It's a huge organization. And I was working in the big deals team. So we're working on big strategic deals, looking at how do we grow key accounts, things like that. And there was this epiphany sort of moment, I guess, when we were really looking to leverage relationships that we have to grow net new portfolios. So it just got me thinking, well, everybody says they have a good relationship. You ask any salesperson what's their relationship like with any key clients, and invariably tell you how wonderful it is. So it just got me thinking. I thought, we know relationships are important. Everybody knows that, and we experience it in our day-to-day life, private and professional. But I just wanted to understand, well, what actually is a high-quality B2B relationship? And that was the genesis of my doctorate research. And I interviewed a whole bunch of CXOs, so very, very senior people from some of the largest corporations around, like BP, Amex, JP Morgan. Some of these people were managing literally $1 billion plus spend a year. So it's like amazing numbers to think about. And others, hundreds of millions. And I asked them a simple question: who's the best person you've ever worked with from the supplier or vendor side? And they all immediately thought about someone, and we just discussed what made them so special, what made that individual that immediately came to their mind, what made that person so special versus the rest of them. And you touched on the magic word there. So when I did my transcripts, I did thematic analysis. So you're looking for themes across all of these interviews to find other common threads, I suppose. I did my transcripts, and a magic 5-letter word was, in the word cloud, was there in the middle when I processed the data in the software, and that word was trust. So there's the trust equation, I think, is central. I'm just going to say, I'm sure your audience is familiar with the trust equation, but I was chatting to couple of people yesterday, a CEO and another guy, and I mentioned the trust equation, and they'd never heard of it. So obviously you have to realize where you're coming from. But in my circles, this sort of trust equation is really the pinnacle of work. David Meister and others created that concept as a part of his book about how to sell to professional services firms. So that was central to my theoretical groundings before I did the work. And then I added some extra color to what trust actually means in a B2B context beyond the basic components of the trust equation.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's the trusted advisor, the book.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, the trust equation is credibility, reliability, and intimacy. They're the inputs, and then you sort of divide that by what you would call self-orientation, like how focused you are on yourself versus the client. Yeah. And you can find a bunch of stuff on YouTube about sort of the details around that. But, credibility is like your positioning in the market. Reliability is do you do what you say you're going to do? Intimacy is are you able to have an informal and raw conversation with the client? Have you got that level of relationship? And as I just said, the self-orientation is probably the most important part, in my opinion, is don't focus on you, focus on them. How do you serve them? How can you understand their business better? How do you understand their challenges, and the whole thing around your ability to gather intelligence to prepare for those conversations. So there's a formula you can, it is subjective, I'd say. So you need to add a 10 for these things, and it creates a subjective trust equation output. But the interesting thing for me is, and when I'm talking generally about this stuff, is what I found from my own research was just a bit more color in there as to what are the best of the best doing.
Yeah.
Beyond what is obvious, I suppose. And I think there's a couple of things here. One is about being effective. They talked about being effective, and that is on your side. Can you get things done internally? Can you make things happen? But also on their side, when they were describing these best of the best people, they were able to navigate their way around the client organization as well. And that was a really important component of building trust and being able to give people responsibility. And another phrase that came up a lot was unvarnished truth. So they were telling the unvarnished truth and not trying to give a sales spin or trying to, be the swan on the lake underneath. You're frantically trying to solve a problem, but giving the appearance that everything's fine on top. And that's what they want. When you're dealing with executives, I think it's really important to understand that they have priorities beyond what you might not, beyond what you see. And what they described to me was, look, we need to know what's happening. I need to know the reality. And it's not necessarily telling them everything. That some of the things need to remain confidential and be messaged in the right way.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that, but they still had that sense that, look, if I want a straight answer, I can get it from this person. And then the final one I'd say is benevolence, which is caring. Really, at a sense that you care about the project, you care about the work. And this is what flies in the face of the typical cliched salesperson, the confident person in the room with an answer for everything. That's not what they weren't describing that person. They were describing someone who's maybe more of an introvert, maybe more asking questions and understanding the detail, and certainly got emotional intelligence and a connection. And a quote that sticks with me quite a bit is when they were describing looking into this person's eyes, and he said that I could tell that they cared. They were really emotionally invested, and he cared more than my own people about the project. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah. It's a great sort of testimonial, or, it should be that almost a war cry, right? Something that salespeople live by. And I think, as salespeople, we are quite literally remunerated on how many people we can get to that next stage, whether that's, if you're in business development, it's a qualified opportunity. If you're in, sales, that's close won revenue. If you're in account management, that's the renewal or expansion, right? So we are taught to chase the revenue, but obviously, by the sounds of things, you're advocating for actually mapping that relationship first. So, one, why do the relationships matter so much more than we think? And two, how do you actually start to encourage that in your teams when the pressure of targets is inevitably, floating around? Say floating around, being pushed down, way floating around, should I say? Yeah.
Well, look, I think I don't have a perfect answer for that, I'm afraid. I think what I'd say on the one hand is what clients want. If we want to serve our clients in the best way, we have to listen to what they're saying. And one thing I didn't mention in my previous monologue there was do not self. That was one of the no-nos. There's a phase between that I just talk about in my thesis as well, is it's called mutual disclosure. So before you meet someone, you don't know them, and before they trust you, there's a phase that you're going through where you're sizing each other up. Like, if you imagine it, there's a power balance in these relationships. You're trying to build a relationship with someone, not necessarily more senior, but generally they tend to be a senior executive.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but you're making the effort. But they're determining, shall I invest in this? Is this person worth my time? And basically, one of the things that is a real turnoff from this research is, are they trying to sell? Is this a sales pitch, or is this a genuine conversation? So there's a couple more components in there that I won't get into now, but that is what they're saying. They want you to understand their business. They want you to not be selling your products. It needs to be linked to helping them solve their problems, and you have to put the hard work in. So we know that, but at the same time, there's pressure internally within your own organization to make sales and to make them happen. And I guess that's the big paradox at the moment, because if the sales don't come, you potentially are at risk of losing your job. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? So
indeed. And then that typically creates this sort of downward spiral, because with the increased pressure when the sales aren't there, you tend to sell more, and that has a detrimental effect. And
sell more, but not sell more. So it's not.
You touched there on those two sort of key skills, behaviors: the genuine care, genuine empathy, and genuine curiosity. And that does lay the foundations of trust. And I think, that then encourages, perhaps isn't the right word, but gives your prospect confidence to actually perhaps put their neck on the line by continuing the conversation, by bringing others from their organization into the conversation, right? Because what we're seeing from the Jolt effect is something like 52%, off the top of my head, of deals end in no deal, because preference for the status quo. And if we could go deeper to what impact the lack of trust or lack thereof is actually having on progressing deals.
You've touched on a few important points there. I think you've got the complexity of these deals is only increasing. The number of stakeholders is only increasing. I've mentioned the doctor. I haven't mentioned the book yet. So the book is specifically about this subject, and the book is around how to identify, map, and develop key stakeholder relationships. So when I was going on my journey, we talked about relationships are important. Well, what is a good relationship? That was the doctorate. And I missed a step out, really, because it's like, relationships are important. Who are the right people that I should be building relationships with? And then do we as an organization have good relationships with those people? Because if you miss that second step, which is the book, you start to focus on people that may not be relevant to your overarching strategy. So if you are thinking, this is the scenario you're describing with the Jolt effect and no decision, you've got whatever it is, the Gartner study, there's a bunch of stats out there today, between 8 and 12 people, way more in my experience, 30, 40, 50 people are involved in some of these big decisions. And these are huge decisions, and they take years. The reality is they do take years. Yeah. And if it doesn't need to be sort of $100 million deal, if it's a significant deal for your company, then it still is going to be one of the biggest deals you've ever done, or the biggest deal of the year, and it will take a while. So you've got to have those individuals mapped out. You've got to understand the use cases. This is what I preach, if that's the right word, is you understand the business value to the different stakeholders, the different use cases, and then have your relationship map. You've got a solution. You need to understand who the decision makers are. You can have a champion who's kind of support you. Obviously, have a stake in the value that you will deliver, but you'll often find that you might need to talk to 2, 3, 4, 5 different business units to really build the business case up and get that groundswell of support. And even having done all of that, it's still a good, tough task to get it over the line. But I think some people, obviously, certainly before people became really aware of this multi-threading strategy with single-threaded, or at least with one team and going through individuals. But I think clients are understanding now as well that if they want to get a deal done, they do need to be more collaborative. They do need to work within the broader organization. So if you've got someone that's open to that, and the champion in particular, they'll bring you in. And if you can educate them as well as to how to sell your solution, they are your biggest champion. And, it's in the word, but you do need they do need to recognize that there's a lot of effort involved on their side. Yeah. And I think that is probably one of the big takeaways when we think about IntraHive. We have a software that helps to measure the quality of relationship. We can also get a view of the interactions that we're having with people. And when I've done analysis for the deals I've worked on, and you realize how much relationship capital IntraHive as a company are investing in this deal and who we're dealing with on the client side, it brings to life the effort that the key people on the client side are investing in you. Yeah. And that doesn't include all of their internal meetings. So that's obviously missing from our analysis, but they would have a whole bunch of stuff going on if it's a software that requires infosec process. So all of that needs to be embraced. And I suppose if you can enlighten them to this journey, because a lot of clients that I come across aren't even familiar with their own processes sometimes. So it can create issues and roadblocks and things that you aren't aware of. And back to your point, when you're reporting up the line about the progress on the deal, even for, some of the biggest companies in the world aren't, the people you're working with aren't aware of the process. And often the bigger the company, the more convoluted the process. And you will come across things that you weren't expecting because the person you're dealing with wasn't expecting, and you start to pass this stuff up the chain. It's bad news after bad news. And that's what these strategic deals, and certainly the big deals, really, that's basically the flavor of them, I suppose.
You mentioned relationship capital there. How would you define it, and why and how can leaders start to track it and its influence on pipeline?
The whole point of relationship capital, I guess, there's a couple of different aspects to it. But if you're thinking as an organization, as a leader, where are we investing our time? So let's think about the easiest way to do this is prospect accounts. So if you've got a list of prospect accounts, if you aren't engaging with them, obviously nothing's going to happen. So unless, the marketing are doing their job and you've got some people inbound requests coming in, which is great when that happens, but that still requires some effort from your side. But if you are investing a lot of effort in particular set of prospect accounts, you can see that. And if you've got software to enable that, you'll see that, and then you can determine the fruits of that effort. So what is that resulting in? What relationships are you developing? And what type of context of conversations is that resulting in? And then obviously you'd be looking to then create opportunities and go through a traditional sales cycle. But as someone who's got a strong experience in the new business side of things, that's almost the hidden effort and the iceberg, isn't it? All that time and effort that goes in to actually getting somebody to open up to you and give you an opportunity with a piece of work, that almost gets wiped out when you get a proposal and then you win the business. If you talk about how a deal was won and how an account was opened, they'll usually start from, well, we got a proposal, we've got an opportunity, and that's where it began. But they'll miss that years of work, which is often literally 1, 2, 3, 4 years of effort, BD effort, to get that one opportunity. So I think to come back to your question there, which is understanding where the relationship capital is going, and getting a metric to figure out, is it resulting in any traction, but also a very objective perspective to say, look, this is how it's done. This is what you need to do. And I think companies that understand that and are willing to embrace that, to put the hard work in, to get the opportunities in the long term is probably the only way to make this a success. Because if you're looking for quick fixes, it's very difficult. We've probably all seen that stat, which is whatever it is, 3, 4, 6% of people are of your ICP are ready to buy. Yeah. So if there's a magic way to get in touch with those, I guess through clever marketing activities where you can catch people at the right time, that is obviously the sweet spot. But then you've got 90+% of people that you just need to engage with, let them know you exist, let them know they have a problem if they're unaware of it, or let them know you can help solve the problem that they do know they have.
Indeed. And I mean, on top of that, so that 3 to 5% of your total addressable market are in market at any time. But the interesting thing is there was a bit of research from HBR that found that 90% of B2B buyers will choose to work with a vendor that was on their day one shortlist. So if you're hunting for that 3 to 5%, it's likely they've already got their shortlist of vendors that they're going to review. So if you're not on that day one shortlist, it's an uphill battle. So as you said, it's really important to build that relationship capital way in advance, so that when the timing is right, you're top of mind.
Yeah, and that's a good example, because you might be on the shortlist for that one, which you have no chance of winning, but then you're building relationships for the next one where you may be on the shortlist. So it's not easy. Look, like our CEO said to me recently, look, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So, to make these things happen, to put the right amount of effort in, to be strategic about your thinking about these prospects and key accounts and the deals that come from the efforts, requires a certain amount of consistency in your approach.
There's 100 people that matter within a 200,000 person organization. How do you go about identifying and prioritizing? I know in your book you mentioned a sort of 3-step process for stakeholder mapping. Are you able to walk us through that?
Yeah, so look, this is really, I mean, I presented to the global board of KPMG recently, so that was a bit of a career highlight a couple of months ago in Madrid. And, not them in particular, but everybody is looking to grow revenue. You won't meet a client that says they aren't looking to grow revenue. And then you say, well, where shall we focus? And you say, well, let's focus on our existing clients, because we've already done all the hard work. We just talked about how difficult it is to get a prospect account over the line. So that's not going to help you this year generally. So we've already got the MSAs. We've already got people on those accounts and delivering for us. So, and then which of those accounts? Well, then you say, well, let's focus on our biggest accounts. We've got the deepest relationships and move the needle. So then they've got this age-old question, which is a problem across the board. And I've got another client of ours where, they've got 12 service lines. And if you think about the average number of service lines they're selling across their biggest accounts, it's like 1 point something. So these are their biggest accounts, and they've got so much more they can sell within the organization, but they aren't selling. So the whole premise here is, if you want to grow revenue, focus on your key accounts, and then focus on increasing the number of service lines. So this is the genesis of Heidi Gardner's work. I often talk about that. She's written a couple of great books. Most recent one is Smarter Collaboration, and she sets out in the first chapter the business case for collaboration, and it's about growing your number of service lines, and the revenue will grow exponentially as you add on that third or fourth service line. It's not linear, it's exponential, because you've got that trust. You basically create this like critical mass of where the floodgates sort of open, the proverbial revenue floodgates. So that's really that's the foundation of what I'm proposing in the book, especially for the account management use case, is to say, well, let's map out the specific service lines that you have to offer. Let's look at an existing account, whatever it might be. Say, Wells Fargo, you've got revenue from one service line, and who are the key buying personas for the other service lines? So that's where you identify the specific individuals. And if you look on Wells Fargo LinkedIn, you'd see there's over 200,000 employees on LinkedIn. But if you've got a set of services that are relevant to that organization, you do that mapping. The exercise I did, I think it was like 143 people mattered within that 220,000. And that's including the executive suites that are involved in multiple service lines. So that's when it helps you zoom in specifically on the people that matter. So that's the identification aspect to this.
Yep.
And you need to build relationships with them. That's the important part, isn't it? So how do you do that? The next step is relationship intelligence. So understanding what's going on with those individuals, the priorities, and looking at sort of research and intelligence gathering in general to figure out, look, how can we get a pathway to those people? What are their priorities? Who do we know that work in their teams? So you build out that relationship map and gather that intelligence. And then the third step is the engagement strategy. So like, how do we engage with these people? I mean, there's 140 odd. So where do we start? Who do we know? Or out of those people? And probably if we do know someone, we don't go to them directly unless they're a real friendly. They can give us some advice, but who do we know in their team that can help us contextualize our messaging? So, and then it becomes a recurring effort where when you go through that process, you then gather more insight, maybe some other stakeholders, and then you're very meticulous about that process. And back to some of the stuff we've already talked about, when management and executives are asking what's happening and you're showing them the progress, you're detailing the effort. I think if the revenue isn't coming, the fallback option is, well, this is what we're doing. They need to have confidence in what you're doing and trust you, the magic word again, and trust the process. And if you can call to the deal cycle times that you have for other deals, that's probably a good metric to then say, well, look, recent deal that we did or a past deal took this amount of time, and this is going to take 1 year, 2 years. So if to defend yourself in those scenarios, it's good to have some data points as well.
When I first started out in sort of B2B sales, there was a stat that I think it was Gartner. It was along the lines of 80% of all sales interactions will be digital by 2025. And we're in 2025. I wonder how accurate that stat was. But the reason I ask is digital advancements definitely help with the identification, definitely helps with the mapping, identifying those routes in, what mutual connections can we leverage to build, sort of open the door with an individual, but also helps with the engagement to an extent. But how do you build genuine trust in a world of virtual first engagements, virtual first interactions?
Well, I mean, prior to COVID, we didn't have, well, in my experience, we didn't really have the virtual meeting experience. Didn't exist. I mean, obviously Teams and everything, Zoom came out of that process. So prior to COVID, it was tough. But I can tell you, coming out of COVID and since, if you're talking like this one-to-one, you can build a relationship, you can build trust, you can do a lot of the things that are important, you can get to know each other. So I often have to remind myself when I'm meeting someone in person for real, that actually we've actually never met. And we say we've never actually met. Do you realize that? And we'll both take a second to, oh yeah, you're right. But because we feel like we know each other.
Yeah.
So that exists. I think we can, in my opinion, I think that is real. But nothing beats in person, because even if, back to the power balance situation again. So if you're trying to build a relationship with a senior executive, you're making the overtures, you're making the effort. You may not have a series of one-to-one virtual meetings to build that up. So if you do, that's great. But in a group environment, it's much more difficult to read the room, build trust. All of that stuff is more difficult in a virtual scenario. So in the real world, that's where you have those water cooler moments, on the way to the lift after the meeting, the little snippets of informal feedback, the cues in the room. So all of that is a very rich component of what benefits us. And again, this is back to where we started with the trust equation, the self-orientation. This benefits us. We want to meet in person. And maybe come back to the doctorate again. When I finished my doctorate, it took 7 years part-time. I actually defended it during COVID. And I'd done all the work. I've done all the interviews prior to COVID. And you have an independent assessor. And we went through the entire viva, they call it. And he said at the end, you've done a fantastic work here, but do you realize it's completely obsolete? Because the world's changed now. And you get a thing where you can get major reviews, minor reviews, or you get an immediate pass. I got minor reviews, which is the most common outcome in that scenario. And he asked me to go back to re-interview the people I'd interviewed to ask them how their perspective had changed since COVID. So that was a frantic 3 months effort to go back and do an addendum to my thesis, which basically told a different story. So prior to COVID, they said how important it was to meet face to face. I need them in the office. I need to look them in the eye. But after COVID, when I went back to them, they actually said, well, thinking about it, we prefer virtual meetings. This suits us much better. We can see the presentation. We don't need to go down to meet them in the lobby and have a chit chat. Did you come far? And, all these efforts to serve our purposes, because we want to build that relationship. They don't care about any of that stuff. You have to remember. And interesting, what they said is we do everything virtual to kick things off. And then when we've decided if we like a solution, we like what we've seen so far, when we're doing the shortlist, then we'll put the effort in to meet them. Yeah. And then we'll talk about that, maybe a lunch, maybe a question about the solution, and it's around a specific subject. So I thought that was really interesting when you think about it in that the client's shoes again. So we've got our shoes, which is always great to go and meet them, and their shoes is they don't want to meet a bunch of people all day long and different times, and the saying getting to know you questions and icebreakers. And
yeah, indeed. Ryan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to squeeze one last quick question in. If you could debunk one myth about B2B relationships, what would that be?
That is a good question. I think I did touch on it earlier. I think there's this perception that the salesperson is a slick, confident, as answer to everything, can roll any objection with a very confident response. I don't think that is the modern salesperson, and maybe salesperson not the right word. Someone who wants to build real relationships. That is too shallow, in my opinion. It's too one-dimensional. So if you're going back to the core, which has been the purpose of this session, the podcast today, is about how do you build real relationships. It's to be authentic. We hear a lot about that today on LinkedIn, but to actually be prepared to not have the answer, to be more thoughtful about how you respond, and even to say no, or to not have a confident response is I think is genuine. And I think people appreciate that, and it always rings true to not be selling. So if you're selling, it's much more difficult to build relationships, real relationships. So I'd probably stick with that one.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think being able to, hold your hands up and say, do you know what? I don't know the answer. I don't have an answer for you, but I assure you I will go away, find out that answer and come back to you. I think it builds credibility, right? And lays that foundation for genuine trust.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Ryan, where can people connect with you? Where's the best place? I would imagine LinkedIn.
Yep, I'm pretty much a LinkedIn guy, so connect on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect, chat to people. If you've got thoughts, ideas, comments, always happy to have a conversation and build some new relationships. So nice, Ryan. Thank you again to everyone listening. Until next time. Next week on the ISP Podcast.
I used to hate sales, or rather I think what I thought sales was. I saw salespeople as being pushy, manipulative. When people feel relaxed, they tend to revert to type. So a key part of understanding these is to help people relax through that process, to make sure you see a bit about the real them. There's a Thomas Edison quote, there's always a way to do it better, you just got to find it.